We are today. I don't think there could have been too many times in history when a nation has woken up, if we have woken up, to a loss of 122 million jobs in 1 month. The Center for Monitoring Economy tells you that you have lost 122 million jobs in a month, and that's in the non-farming sector. Okay. 91.3 million of those are small traders, hawkers, street vendors. About 17.8 million of those are wage laborers, and 18, I mean, you have the self-employed, so to speak, and you have 18.2 million salaried people, or 17, 18 million salaried people who've also lost their jobs. Many of those jobs are not going to return. Okay, a lot of those little kirana dukans, etc., it's very difficult for them to make a comeback, especially since we will orient all our relief packages towards the behemoths, the big guys, give them the money and not worry too much about the small and medium, the SSMEs or whatever you want to call them. That's one part of it. As of today, millions of people are in so-called relief camps or attending food camps. We get these numbers entirely from the two affidavits that the central government has filed in the Supreme Court. One on March 31st and the other on April 12th. The April 12th one, mind you, that's already dated by close to a month. The April 12th one shows a doubling of the number of people in the relief camps and a six-fold increase in the number of people going to the food camps. Incidentally, as of mid-April, 69% of all those relief camps were in the single state of Kerala, in one state of Kerala. Yeah. So you can imagine what the heck is going on elsewhere, which is not recorded. We have no knowledge of, nothing. So that's it was on April 12th, you had 1.43 million people, 14.5 lakh people in the relief camps, and 13.4 million people at the food camps. We're now talking about crores of people, over 10 million people who are going to relief camps or food camps. The relief camps, I don't know how voluntary their internment or whatever at the relief camps is, but in Kerala it was voluntary, but elsewhere it may not have been the case. Then we have, apart from the jobs, apart from the employment scenario, we have a incredible announcement that the government, instead of feeding those millions of people going to the food camps with the so-called surplus or buffer stock that we have of nearly 70 million tons, has given permission for the conversion of millions of tons of rice into ethanol. Okay, the stated purpose is that by converting it into ethanol, boy, we are going to create a hell of a lot of hand sanitizer. Yeah, we're going to destroy food to create hand sanitizer. Now, please also note that the creation of hand sanitizer requires incredible amounts of water, especially when you're going to do it on that scale. The real reason, in my opinion, for the conversion of ethanol is, I think a little bit of it will go into your hand sanitizer and the rest of it will go into blending petrol. blending it with petrol. You know, you got to keep the beautiful people happy in this country, and that's what we're going to do with it. In another 15 days, a large number of Indian districts are going to enter their annual water scarcity cycle. In Marathwada, that's begun. Okay, in Latur, for instance, it will follow up in Osmanabad, in Bid. All the usual suspects are going to have a lot of water scarcity issues, to which the government will get the Indian Meteorological Department to predict a normal monsoon for you. Now, I love the way the IMD has gone about its job in recent years. It's very creative. Last year, they predicted, they declared a near normal monsoon. There's no such thing. There's never been a category in 107 years of history of the IMD. There is a deficit, or there is normal, or there is a surplus or an excess. The category near normal came into being because last year was election year. So you said near normal. It's like saying that the person in the ICU is nearly alive, or near normal, right? So that's what happened with the IMD last year. I would be the happiest person alive if there is going to be a good monsoon. But please have an understanding of what normal means. Normal in South Mumbai and South Delhi is beyond the dreams of avarice and luxury for people living in Mehboob Nagar, Karim Nagar, Warangal, North Karnataka, or Marathwada. Their normal is that you don't get to wash your hands twice a day. Their normal water consumption. And you're asking them to wash their hands 6 to 8 times a day as their districts are getting into their normal summer conditions of water scarcity. Yeah, and you're going to convert tons of rice. We don't know how many millions of tons, but the permission has been given. And by the way, that's going to have a particular impact on the south of India because it's rice that's south and east of India, because it's rice that's going to be converted into ethanol. Yeah. So here we are, and with all the troubles that we could ask for, and our most creative response to it so far, when 122 million jobs are lost, is to reopen tens of thousands of liquor shops. Okay, this is the smart, creative idea we have come up with. Now, incidentally, a couple of cities and states have revoked the order for the kind of chaos that has caused with 2.5 kilometer long queues for liquor. Yeah, at a time when people are broke, at a time when people have no money to spend, and you open these, and what little relief, I don't know whether it's a relief measure, the reopening of liquor shops. And the reason given is that liquor shops bring you revenue, and that gives the state something to do. I think it leads us to a much larger debate on whatever happened to the sources of revenue of states in the last 20 years, and particularly with the coming of the GST. We have removed the nation and the states have both privatized so much of public resources that each successive government circumscribed its own power to raise revenues. You sold off to your friends and your buddies, every successive government, not just this one. Navaratnas, you sold off incredibly profitable companies like VSNL, if someone remembers the Vijay Sanchar Nigam Limited, which was sold for 1,800 crores and had 3,600 rupees cash in its possession at the time of sale. So it was really a gift of 1,800 crores to the buyer, apart from all those fantastic properties it had in every city. Government after government has whittled away the power of the states all over the world. This has happened for 35 years, in India for 28 years. Governments get elected to do away with government, to dismantle the levers of, to lower taxes, to increase the happiness of your billionaires. Now, this, on the one hand, is one of the things that's going on. So you say that we have to reopen the liquor shops to raise revenue. It's just an incredible question to be discussing what happened to the revenues of states and of governments. With all this happening, first, we make an incredibly ill-timed announcement that panics millions of people into fleeing the city. And why shouldn't they flee the city when what reason have they to trust us? What reason do they have to think that we are going to look after them? There's a considerable amount of hypocrisy involved in our crying, in our shedding tears for migrant laborers now for three reasons. One, they've been there a fairly long time and we never bothered about their conditions. Okay. I beg to claim some exceptions. In the People's Archive of Rural India, which website Sangeeta told you about, which I run, the biggest section of People's Archive of Rural India with the largest number of articles is called The Rural in the Urban, which is migrants. We look at migrants 365 days a year and therefore are not mystified what the heck is happening as the public has been. Just go back, Sangeeta, just go back before March 2020 and show me in the preceding 10 years, that is from the 2011 census, can you show me one TV panel discussion on migrant laborers? Can you show me one debate on the opinion columns of the newspapers and op-eds, which get people from the think tanks to give opinions, and the government and the bureaucracy and Niti Aayog and the corporate sector, all of them speak about what came out of the census. But you never had a discussion on migrant laborers, though the census 2011 showed you the greatest migrations in your history as an independent nation. They showed you the URGD, the urban rural growth differential, was at its highest in 40 years, which is a ready reckoner for migration in which demographers use. It showed you for the first time in your history since 1921, it showed you that urban India had added more people than rural India. It's necessary to know some of this history, okay? What you're seeing isn't something that happened from March 25th. What happened from March 25th was the panic triggered by people who have no sense of what rural India is about, who don't have a sense of what poor people are about. Okay? We'll come to that issue of dealing with labor in a moment. The last time rural India added more people than urban India was 1921 census. Why? Because in the 1918 pandemic, the so-called misnamed Spanish flu, anywhere between 16 and 20 million Indians perished. By the way, that flu came from Europe, not from China. It came from the returning soldiers from the green fields of France, where colonial powers, inter-imperialist rivalries, were settled with the free use of mustard gas and all kinds of chemical weapons, which Mr. Winston Churchill, whom we quote always on democracy, was the most ardent advocate of. And he advocated the use of poison gas and chemical weapons, particularly in Asia, in Iraq. He said it would induce a certain lively moral terror in the primitive tribes. This was how he looked at the people of this continent. Okay. So anyway, the returning soldiers from there took the flu or some kind of influenza that had evolved, God knows how, to their respective countries, wiping out millions of people across the world, more than 50 million people in one estimate, and in India, 16 to 20 million people, right? Now, as a result of that, there was a net reduction in the rural population for the first time ever. and urban India. Now, but in 2001 to 2011, there was no pandemic. There was all sorts of, there was all sorts of panic over the plague and SARS. The plague, I mean, the amount of coverage we gave the plague, it killed 53 people. But the panic over it, you'd think it was as important as COVID is today, because, I mean, it scared the beautiful people. Plague germs, as I often say, are no respecters of class distinctions. Right? They're notorious for their non-observance of class and social distinctions. Now, in 2001 to 2011, there was no pandemic, no major gigantic killer. And yet, urban India added 1 million more human beings than rural India. Compare that to the last census of 2001. Urban India added 68 million human beings, 2001 census. But in that same census, rural India added 113 million more human beings, which means rural India added 45 million more human beings than urban India did. And in 10 years, the switch around is not 1 million, it's 46 million. 46 million more people in urban India. This can happen for three reasons. Family, growth size, growth rate of population, which is absurd because urban India's growth rate of population is even lower than that of rural India's. Second, and population rates generally have been falling. 22 Indian states have reached fertility replacement level, and urban India's reduction in the population growth rate is far greater than that of rural India's. Family size is smaller than that of rural India's. The second reason why it can happen is that a large number of villages are reclassified as towns. But then you'd have to look at statutory towns and census towns. The statutory town is your evolved town, Bengaluru, Mumbai, all of that came through the statutory town status. They have a proper, all the paraphernalia of a town. The census town is an arbitrary town. 4 or 5 villages have lost their agriculture. Incidentally, a lot of people in the social sector are unaware there is no definition of rural in the census. There is no definition of what is rural in the Indian census. Okay? There is a definition of urban, and whatever isn't urban is rural. Okay? An urban unit or a town in India is one where the population is not less than 5,000, one where the density per square kilometer is not less than 400, and one where less than 25% of the male workforce remains in agriculture. What it means is agriculture is over in that village when less than 25% of the male workforce is in it. So these three things define an urban unit or a town, and whatever doesn't fit into this definition is rural. Okay? So you still end up having 69% of your population in rural India by a definition by exclusion. Now, now look at the impact in 4 or 5 fields, and then we can start discussing it. Okay. Look at how we are reacting to the migrant laborers trying to go back home. Firstly, my own call was that I knew that when that speech was made by the Prime Minister, I knew that we were in for deep, we were deep, deep, deep in the mire. And of course, you know, Rajdeep asked me in an interview, do you think they'll come back? I said, of course. I mean, given our irresistible charm as middle-class employers, everyone will come back, won't they? They'll come back because they don't have options. Not all will come back, but many will, and they're not going to come back tomorrow. They're going to take a hell of a, it's going to be very dislocated. It could take up to a year. But people will come because we have destroyed options. We have destroyed employment in the countryside. We have tanked agriculture and all allied occupations. So that's one. Second, are you aware that even today, the governments of UP and several others, all the BJP ruled states, are passing ordinances suspending existing labor laws. Okay? The security of the laborer is being suspended. In Gujarat, the Gujarat Chamber of Commerce, that matter is already going to court, has demanded that no labor union should be allowed to form for a year. No trade union, no labor union should be allowed formation for a year. What we're doing now is to, and then many places, the government is telling people, even in other units, uh, that you're going to have to work 12 hours a day at lower salaries or the same thing, okay? At 12 hours a day. This is the only country in the world that is breaking the 8-hour, the golden standard of 8 hours a day of work, 8 hours a day of rest, 8 hours a day of whatever you want to do. That's been the standard for 100 years plus now. And we are doing away with it by saying they have to work 12 hours. What we are doing is quelling a revolt of the slaves. Okay, that's what we're doing. We are quelling a rebellion by the serfs and telling them, no, Karnataka has cancelled the migrant trains. Chief ministers meet the builders of a city and then make policy that, no, we can't let the migrant laborers go, they're needed here. My own thing was in favor of them staying in the city and us making them conditions, because our own the fact it's now coming out that our bleeding hearts for migrant laborers is because we've lost their services. Okay, that carpenter you had, the plumber who came to your house at call, 5 minutes call, all these guys are not there. When corporations, when the city corporations, municipal corporations are trying to expand their workforce, they are suddenly finding there's nowhere to expand because many of their existing members have left, right? So we had a different way of dealing with this. You could have declared that all your closed schools, hostels, colleges, community centers were centers for migrant and homeless relief. That should have been the first thing you did on March 26th. Okay, you did. You panicked people into stampeding because they correctly assessed that these employers are not going to look out for us. They're not going to look after us. They're immediately going to stop paying us, which is what happened. Then we panicked them into going onto the highway to make hikes of 300 to 1,200 kilometers. There are people who have been walking 9 days, 10 days. Today, there's a guy cycling with his wife and child on the cycle 1,400 kilometers from Telangana to some part of Uttar Pradesh, right? Now, you could have stopped that by opening up the schools and distributing the food, the other things that you have, that surplus that you have, instead of which you're planning to convert that into ethanol. You are changing labor laws to an extremely repressive regime in order to hold them back. Then they start walking, you stop them at the state boundaries. Those who get past the state boundaries are met at their own villages with barricades, telling them you can't enter here, because every little tin pot official at the ground level now becomes more authoritarian than before, right? And has public sanction for it. Then we tell them we will transport you to your homes if you feel so strongly about it, except that you pay the full fare of your tickets. Then the builders and other lobbies and factories speak to the chief ministers, and some states are canceling those trains. That's where labor is at. Second, agriculture. Where I am making this appeal on every talk I'm giving, on everything I'm writing. We need that every farmer in this country shifts to food crop. You are going to have one hell of a time in the Kharif. Understand this. the existing Rabi crop, whatever is cash crop, is either lying unsold or rotting in the field. Hmm? The idea that your cash crops you're going to massively, the idea that you're going to massively export your cash crops, forget it. There has been a gigantic crash in income and consumption worldwide. And I'm just appalled to see that farmers in Punjab and Haryana are being advised to replace paddy, water guzzling crop, which it is, and they should be growing something else, but they're going to replace it with cotton. I promise you, disaster lies ahead. As of now, I don't know, maybe some 70 lakh quintals or whatever of cotton is lying unsold in Vidarbha. God knows how many lakhs of tons, how many millions of tons of sugarcane are lying with the sugar mills and the sugar factories, unsold, unpicked up. You're going to repeat cash crops in the Kharif, you're going to run into two problems. One, you're going to destroy, you're not going to sell anything. You're going to be left with your crop, it's going to rot, and you will starve. That's the second thing. The food security of the farmer and the farm laborer itself is going to be completely undermined unless you grow food crop, at least for them. Because please know this, 75% plus of Indian farmers, small marginal people, are net purchasers of food grain on the market. They do not produce enough food crop on their fields for their own families. They buy food grain on the market. So this whole thing of pushing millions of people, subsistence farmers, towards cash crops and things which we have done for the last 25 years, on the wonderful advice that cash crops will get you dollars, hard currency, and you will eliminate poverty. In that quest, we destroyed food security. Yeah. So that's where agriculture is. What can you do? The third thing is that the government should be creating that ecosystem for the coming Kharif season for inputs, for food crop, for seeds, for food crop, for all the other kinds of inputs and logistical systems that are necessary for food crop. That has to happen very fast instead of going for cotton and cash crops again. Worldwide, the income crash and consumption crash is worldwide. No one's going to buy your cotton and sugarcane on the scale that you imagine that they will. The third is farm laborers. What the heck are they going to do? Okay, are you if you merge, if you're going to use the MNREGS, we have announced a hike, 12% hike, which is 20 rupees a day, without adding a single additional day of work. Nor have we figured out how we are going to do your social and physical distancing in the NREGs. There is no discussion of that at all. We haven't at all started planning for the water crisis and for the food crop crisis. We haven't even talked about the water crisis because for us there is none. Then comes the idea of, what happens next in two major sectors. You guys are, call yourself the Indian leaders of the social sector. And I bet that all of you are in one way or the other worried about and connected with health and education. Shall we look at what's happening to education? I'm seeing celebratory mails and celebratory things about the growth of online education. Guys, tens of millions of Indian children are in government schools where you're lucky to have a decent blackboard. Yeah. How many, forget the students, how many teachers of those schools have the capacity that you and I have to have a Zoom discussion and a webinar? Huh? What are we doing? We're celebrating this thing, which is fine. I find it very useful. It's great. Without bothering about what's going to happen to tens of millions of little children who have no such thing. Second, we are not considering the social impact of education converting to online on the scale, and many people are going to make it more and more online. All your private sector colleges and universities are going in for that because they're going to save money on it, are going to hire fewer teachers, use more freelance lecturers and It'll be a damn good thing for me, but I'm saying look at what it does to your kids. The most important alienation in this process, even for those kids who are lucky enough to be part of it, is the absence of a physical interaction there with a teacher, the complete erasure of socialization of the child, the socialization of the student with other students, with other groups, with their teachers, with their, you know, companions. It frightens me what kind of an education you are looking at. Hmm? So you absolutely, we are not even considering this. What's going to happen. For years, we have starved and on bank and funded, World Bank and IMF. We have expanded the health and education sectors in the private sector and done very little, starved the government schools of funds, right? You can see who goes to the government schools. You can see there's a clear caste basis, there's a clear class basis to the kids in those schools. That's in education. In health, I said it on March 25th, I'm saying it again. You're going to have a hell of a lot more deaths from non-COVID diseases. You're going to have a lot more people dying. I mean, those marching away on the highway, yeah, with all the dabas and everything else where they would normally have worked their way through, closed, with those interstate bus terminals and the tea shops closed, with all the work possibilities on the route closed, people are going to die of diarrhea, dehydration, hunger. Yeah. So hunger is back in a very huge way. And the most dramatic response we have made to it so far is to reopen the liquor shops and declare that we will convert millions of tons of rice into ethanol for petrol blending. So the health sector was always what COVID-19 has done, and which people in the social sector should realize gives them an opportunity to make an argument, is that it has brought out in vivid relief all those things that are wrong in your society. COVID-19 has signaled every existing weakness in the social sector. It's signaled everything that has gone wrong with our so-called path of development. Now, you could have a different health system. We can discuss that in what other measures we can take to it. But your health system, just please look at the NSS rounds on health. 42nd round, 50th round, 62nd round, 70th round, whatever. You've had 4 rounds, health rounds. Please look at round to round. How many Indians are not seeking medical attention for purely financial reasons? How that number has expanded. Yeah. Yeah. Expand private sector in health. Give them choice. Oh yeah, they have a choice now. Near 5-star hospitals near my house are charging 6,500 rupees for COVID testing. Okay. The government's thing is 4,500. Actual cost is 1,500 to 1,700 or less. I mean, there are people who say it's less. So, we need to look at what we did in the last 45 years, in the last 35 years, last 25 to 28 years, when we bought into a lot of concepts which you in the social sector must now throw out of the window. One of those ideas was healthcare is something to be bought and sold and traded on the stock exchange. It isn't. Okay? It's a human right. It's a fundamental right. Water is a fundamental right, not just of human beings, but of all the species we share this planet with. It's called the water planet. Right? Education, a fundamental right of every child in this country. What's going to happen to it now? All these existing problems, which we were told was being washed away with our bold reforms, you now see what actually is happening. How fragile your poverty reduction has been, which we achieved by redefining poverty periodically lower downwards. Okay? So now you know how close your population is to destitution or to you know, hunger or to starvation. Yeah, I think it calls for a lot of introspection about who we are, yeah, in the middle classes, in the intelligentsia, what kind of systems we've argued for. And I also, incidentally, speaking of education, I hope you know that the Supreme Court yesterday threw out a petition asking the court to put order landlords who have got students PGing in their homes not to evict those who cannot pay their rent during this period. The Supreme Court of your country threw that petition out. They were saying, somebody went there saying that students are being evicted from private hostels and with landlords and PGs, they're being thrown out. Please stop this process. And the court said it saw no reason to do that under Article 32 or whatever the case was. Finally, look at our forums of public discourse. Look at the media, how they have failed you, how they have failed people. Suddenly on March 26th, they discovered the migrant laborer and suddenly discover, they go back and read and find that there are more than 400 million migrants in India and more than 130 million of them have crossed state borders. Yeah, a hell of a lot of them did that. Why did they? It's not so, the question is not, will they come back? The question is, why did they leave their villages in the first place to come to us? Because we smashed agriculture, as I have been pleading and shouting from the rooftops for 20 years. You created an agrarian crisis, and now you're asking agriculture to accommodate them. Yeah, that's why because the job losses, agriculture is actually showing an uptick in the number of people joining work because people have gone back to their land, which has huge complications. As say millions of Odia workers from Surat go back to Ganjam, and they go back to houses where, you know, 5 unemployed brothers are sitting together fighting over the property, yeah, over the land. You're going to see a hell of a lot of things coming. Could we have done this differently? And what can we do? This is the package, as I said. It's not just the pandemic is also a package. The pandemic has unveiled for you a package not of the virus's making, but a package of our own making, a package of inequality, essentially, which our great economists, who can never predict one thing right, who can never get a single thing right, but who, when the shit hits the fan, the same guys are trotted out onto your TV channels to tell you what went wrong. The same guys who on TV, your chief economic advisor and another leading member of the Niti Aayog, the Mr. Arvind Subramaniam and Vivek Debroy, in 2017 declared in a debate with Thomas Piketty on Niti Razdan's show in NDTV, inequality is not an issue. That's what they said. It's not an issue. Go back and see that TV interview, that debate. Now you know that it is. So what I'm saying is that COVID has shown you, has unveiled a package of our own making of the last 28 years. COVID has unveiled, is doing a post-mortem, an autopsy, if you like, on how we killed the few protections that the poor had. What do we do from here? Are there things we can do that are meaningful? Absolutely, but I think, Sangeeta, I'll stop there and you can, we can discuss it in terms of questions. I mean, otherwise I'll go on forever about what's happening on labor and agriculture. So we can go in terms of questions, which if you can read out some of those questions to me, I'll be happy. And maybe you take 2 or 3 at a time and we can discuss it. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sainath. That was really mind-blowing. Okay, so we did receive a lot of questions before the webinar, and there are a few questions that have come up now also. I think I'll start with one question that really has been on all of our minds, is just how do we reconcile the fact that although we have surplus food grains in our state go downs, hunger continues to be a harsh reality in our society. And I think this irony sort of became more stark in the the lockdown era. And what do we really need to do to address this apart from apathy? Is it about fixing our supply chain? Is it decentralization of agriculture and the PDS at the panchayat level? What really?
Okay. Uh, Sangeeta, the understanding of this problem as coming into stark relief or happening now is part of the outcome of having a media to which history is the history of the last 1 week. Please know, and you do know, you guys are in the social sector, you know, that the problem of having 60 million tons of food grain, while and half the world's hungry, is something that goes back 20 years at the very least. I remember in the year 2000, 2001, Professor Jean Drèze and a couple of others did a calculation of how many times you could go to the moon and back if you created a ladder of all the sacks of food lying in the, you remember that? You remember that calculation that Jean had made about you'll reach the moon and back so many times if you just piled all those sacks of grain. Many of those sacks of grain, if you say flew into Raipur airport and then went into Raipur town from the airport, you could see you could see lakhs of tons of grain lying in open fields without any protection. Yeah, I mean, just in gunny sacks, lying there piled up like that. In year 2000, I will never forget the day that all four countries, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh declared surplus grain. India declared a surplus of 63 million tons, 64 million tons or something like that. Pakistan declared a surplus of 4 million tons, and little Bangladesh declared a surplus of 1 million tons. It was quite perversely fascinating. Here were three countries with 70 million tons of food grain surplus and home to half the world's hungry. That, Sangeeta, was never a surplus of food. It was a surplus of hunger. If I understand the dictionary definition, whether I go by the dictionary definition of surplus or by the humane definition of surplus, I would understand surplus to mean that, let's say we are a family, when everybody's needs have been met, that which remains is your surplus. Yeah, you have half the world's hungry and you talk about a surplus of, that's not a surplus of grain, it's a surplus of hunger, which we mask by our achievements. So it happened 20 years ago. That it's in year 2000 or 2001, you can go back and look it up, how many mountains of grain that we had. Second, even at this moment, you are not, as a government, talking about distributing that grain on a, you keep calling this a war. You have, so you draft in the Air Force to do what? You draft in the Air Force to drop petals, flower petals on the frontline heroes or whoever they dropped it on. I have no idea, right? Now, here is the Air Force, which could just as easily have been commanded to drop food packets instead of flower petals, even in the urban areas where lakhs of people across this country are locked into slums, which have become containment zones within red zones. Gujarat is a fantastic example where people can't step out for food or water. People are unable to step out at all. You could have done dropping of food packets, which would have been, but no, you're not going to touch that grain. Remember that the government pleaded in court, not just this government, but previous governments, that it would distort market prices. Okay, it would do that. So this is one huge problem. The problem is not COVID. The problem is our response, not just to the lockdown, but to our poor and needy and to the kind of policies we have followed. That is the point. If you think that this is going to be solved, I want to tell all your viewers this. If you think this is going to be solved by tinkering with one policy or another, saying, okay, let's replace this spark plug and that wheel, you're headed for further disaster. Tinkering won't do. You need a transformation. You need an entirely different development discourse, an entirely different understanding of what the heck that word means. Yeah. And it doesn't mean private, well, never mind what it means. We'll not go there. But this is what I say to your question about the surplus grain, that it represents the surplus of hunger amongst Indians. And you should be distributing it. And you're on the one hand going to lose millions of tons if you go ahead with your ethanol plan. They've given permission for it. And the second, you're coming up with a kharif where it then becomes even more important to push for. Yeah, I think you need immediately to abolish any requirement, Aadhaar, Shadar, ration card, anything, and absolutely make grain available along with stuff that you need to eat with the grain, cooking oil. Instead of, you are asking a billion people to light diyas, most of whom who didn't have enough oil to light their cooking fire or to add in their cooking oil. Yeah, you wasted so much of your oil on that exercise. You need to abolish at this moment, suspend or abolish all those requirements of ration card, APL, BPL, IPL, whatever it is. Junk it, junk your Aadhaar, junk your biometrics, and give grain to people who are starving and hungry. Yeah, that's the answer.
Thank you. You also spoke about the issue of migrant laborers. So I just wanted to combine the question about a couple of questions actually. One of course the migrant laborers, when the workers, when they go back to the rural, when they go back to their villages, how are we going to build the rural economy, the rural capacity to give livelihoods to all these people, and where does that conversation even begin? And should they come back? Somebody is asked, how do we as a society actually how do we support them in rebuilding their lives? That's one question. And just combining all the questions related to the migrants and of course labor, is that there was a point, Sainath, when we were journalists several years ago, when labor was a beat, and we don't have a labor beat anymore. So, and we've also seen labor not becoming, or agriculture not becoming an election issue or even a political issue. So what happened and how do we set that right?
When I joined journalism, which was a very long time ago in the common era, uh, every newspaper almost had a full-time labor correspondent. Yeah. And every newspaper had someone called an agriculture correspondent. And lo and behold, some of those agriculture correspondents actually covered farming. Yeah. In the 60s and 70s, newspapers like the Hindu, if you joined as a reporter, you had to work your way up from the districts, from some small town, maybe get noticed, come to that edition, district edition, or whatever. You really started out with that. Covering agriculture means, in India, there are a few people actually called agriculture correspondents. They mostly cover the agriculture ministry, and sometimes if it's a Mr. Pawar, they just cover the agriculture minister. The present agriculture minister, it's hard to remember what his name is. Yeah. So even that era has passed. Because now all journalists cover only one man or two, right? So agriculture is out. You don't have a farming correspondent, someone who covers the mandi, who covers that at full time, works at agriculture. Please note this, that if you look at agriculture and you look at allied occupations, and by the way, for a lot of people who don't know, agriculture and agrarian are not the same thing. Agrarian society is something much larger than agriculture. The number of cultivators and full-time farmers is actually much smaller than people imagine. We imagine that we are a country of 60% farmers. And we have seen clowns on the Niti Ayog write this stuff. Okay. Um, and great economists, dons of Colombia, write this. With 60% of Indians being farmers, less than 8% of Indians are farmers by the census of in 2011. But less than 8% is still 95 million human beings. Okay. They are full-time farmers, which means main cultivators. Those who depend on agriculture for their primary income, which means 180 days or more operating a piece of land. No size attached to it, no ownership attached to it, no gender attached to it. The Indian census definition is quite genuinely a broad definition. It doesn't say it has to be a man. It doesn't say you have to own that piece of land. It doesn't say. But going with that definition, the number of main cultivators of so-called full-time farmers is 8% or less. And that was 2011. Because look at the irony of the job situation. Between 1991 census and 2011 census, 15 million full-time farmers lost that status. It means you were losing main cultivators at the rate of 2,000 a day. 1991 to 2001, you lost 7.2 million. You can see that in the census. 2001 to 2011, you lost 7.7 million. Now, where did they go? They didn't all go to the cities and they didn't all commit suicide, okay? They didn't all rush to the cities. There's another problem of ignorance of who a migrant is. All migrations are not from a village in Bihar to the metro of Mumbai. There are many kinds of migrants. There are short-term migrants, seasonal migrants, circular migrants, the long-term migrants. Yeah. Above all, the most vulnerable class of migrants are those some of us call footloose migrants. Those who don't have a clear destination in their head, where they will be 3 months, 6 months from now. They're just going to look for so many days of work and eat and survive and live. And then, so you come to Mumbai, in a construction site, you have 90 days work. Then the contractor tells you it's over, but my brother-in-law is building a road in Sangli. You go there. These are your footloose migrants. They are tens of millions of Indian citizens who are footloose migrants. They have no fallback, no future. Now, where did these 15 million farmers go? A very large number of them. As you can see, the column of farmers plummeting. Which column is exploding? Agricultural laborers. That's exploding because many of them have fallen into the ranks of the agrarian underclass. To this situation, you are now sending millions more people into that class. Yeah. And remember, all the logic of the last 20 years, we destroyed livelihoods in the countryside. We destroyed livelihoods in the agriculture. We saw a crisis in which 315,000 farmers, according to the government of India, not me, have taken their lives. I think the number is much higher. We have seen all this, and now we're going to see pressure on the land again from people who don't have control of that land, right? So you want to do something in that, you're going to have to change, you're going to have to address ghosts that you thought you had put to sleep in the 90s. What you're going to do instead, by the way, what is actually going to happen is that you're going to even more forcibly acquire more land because Indian industry has the notion that it's going to get all those industries that are leaving China. Okay? So you're going to grab even more land to create an even bigger land pool, yeah, as millions of more people go back there. We just don't, most Indians, and mainly the Indian middle classes and the intelligence here have no clue who a migrant is, where she came from, where she's going. So you have to go back and address old issues of inequity and land concentration, land reform, different kinds of ownership of land redistribution, because millions of acres of land lie with governments, which, surplus land, which are grabbed under the surplus laws, which you need to redistribute. There are incredibly inspiring examples of what people can do. For me, one of the most inspiring examples in the world comes from your home state of Kerala. It's called the Kudumbashree movement. These are landless women. Okay. I can't believe that an organization could grow from 20,000 in the rally that I saw in 1998 or 1999, somewhere, to 4.3 million members, all women. Okay. And not only do we see that happen, with the core of Kudumbashree, the agriculture sector of Kudumbashree, is comprised of 70,000 Sangha Krishis, group farming. The smallest collective is 1 acre, the largest collective is 1 hectare, and it's 4 to 10 women. These are the only farmers I have seen in 25 years, 20 years, because that's how old they are, make profits. Okay? And they have a policy, a philosophy which I have stolen. One was, we work with governments, never for governments. Okay? It's an incredible example of how the social sector and government can work. Second, they taught me the concept that food security, food sovereignty, these are very limited in vision. They taught me the words food justice and taught me the word solidarity economy, which is what they are. Yeah. We are going to have to address, not post-COVID, because we really don't know when post-COVID is to be declared. We are going to have to address all these sectors, the social sector from now, not in entrepreneurialism, not in individual entrepreneurialism, but in collective striving for justice. The framework now has got to be justice, food justice, land justice. This is how we have to go if we are to survive the incredible damage, not of the virus, but of the greater virus of neoliberalism and the destruction of millions, 100 million livelihoods in the last 28 years. Now, you destroyed your health sector, what little of it existed. And in the last budget, there was no COVID when the last budget came out. You declared that district level hospitals would be up for private management. Now, what the hell are you doing? Ireland, Spain have nationalized all the medical facilities in their country to force private hospitals into conducting free tests and free treatment for COVID patients. From here on, your framework in the social sector should be justice. I'm saying there is such a thing as health justice, right? Remember, that was thought about in 1978 in the Alma Ata Declaration, health for all by 2000. We delivered malaria for all by that period. Yeah. So these are, this is where you have to go. You have to reconstruct. And I also want to add one thing about the jobs and the reconstruction. Please don't think it's only migrant laborers. They are a major force. They're gigantic. Every other occupation and livelihood is taking a thrashing. How many of the educated middle classes understand that handlooms and handicrafts are the second biggest employer in this country after agriculture? The kind of hit that handloom and handicrafts workers are taking, it's appalling. It's heartbreaking. Okay, one of the good things we did for them is now turning out to be a liability. Seeing the state of handicrafts, a lot of good people wonderful people, help them find, refine their craft, get them recognition nationally, worldwide, bring them to urban markets. The trouble is that they make most of their money now on urban markets. And February, March, April are the peak season for your exhibitions at Bandra Kurla Complex or Bandra Reclamation or Delhi Heart. And this is when billions of rupees of orders come through. What's happened? From February, you started closing those. Delhi Heart, there are people sitting with lakhs of unsold stock. I mean, they go there with 10 to 15 rupees, 10 to 15 lakhs sales ideas. They've sold 75,000 rupees, 50,000 rupees, and are sitting there and quarantined, some of them as well. In the villages, the craftspersons who were getting ready for the March, April um, hearts and festivals, they are sitting with, they're drowning in piles of in piles of inventory, stockpiles of inventory. What happens to them? What happens to the weavers of Chirala, the famous Chirala sari? And by the way, as a Telugu, I tell you that the name Chirala comes from sari. Chira in Telugu is sari. That's what I believe anyway. I think it came, the town got its name from the weavers, the kind of sari they wore, right on the verge of starvation. And that is true of weavers everywhere in the country today. What about them? What about fishermen? If you take the east coast of India, yeah, take again my home state of Andhra Pradesh, Vishakhapatnam. You have very correctly a ban on fishing between April 15 and June 14, because that's the breeding season, the spawning season for fish. And even fishermen understand that and they don't fish. It's almost a self-regulated thing that you don't fish between in those 2 months. But it means that the 2 weeks preceding those 2 months are the peak fishing period, the peak profit period. And both those weeks went under lockdown. So you have fishermen going out to sea at great risk and coming back, getting beaten by policemen, which will happen because they're breaking the law. You're looking at toy makers in Varanasi. You're looking at sari weavers in Kanchipuram. You're looking at other craftspersons, in potters in Bengal, the red terracotta horses. You're looking at people whose slide towards hunger. They're already down that highway between hunger and starvation. And what are you able to do for them? So it's migrant laborers are extremely important, and they're going to add to this explosive mix back in their villages where hunger is already rising. So you're going to have to approach these issues, and you have a basis for that justice framework. It's embedded, and it's so sad to see the kind of Supreme Court rulings that we are getting on these issues. I am really in despair over how the apex court is treating what are embedded principles in the Constitution of India, which are known as the directive principles of state policy, and for which at least 3 Supreme Court judgments exist in the last 30 years, saying that the directive principles are every inch as important to this country as the fundamental rights, including Justice Ashok Ganguly, which was the last judgment of the issue. The directive principles are based on the issue of justice. And remember that your preamble, what does it say? It gives you a priority. It says justice, social, economic, and political. I don't think it's an accident that social and economic come first, right? I think that what you and I and all of us, social sector or non-social sector, have to recognize that we need to dismantle the gigantic inequality that has grown in the last 25 years. And the framework is justice.
Thank you so much, Sainath. We are completely out of time. We would love to go on listening to you, but we are out of time. Lots of questions to think about for all of us in the sector, outside the sector, urban population, all of us. But I think we really love the message of justice that you leave us with, and I guess that's what we will remember a lot and strive for from this conversation. Thank you so much, Sainath. It's a pleasure having you with us. Thank you.
Thank you.